so I do like to put a few twists and turns into my work, to spice it up a little bit in that sense. And it's also, a lot is based around reality, which is probably a bone of contention within fiction, but I think the scenarios, the environments that I choose, they come from real world living as a basis. So that's where I try to impart my words, if you like, and also express myself and grow as an author through doing that. So yeah, it's that's. I mean, I think if I go back, I was brought up with Barbara Cartland and Catherine Cookson, if I put it into that kind of context. And only one of them, I think, had movies made out of their books. And, you know, the Catherine Cookson edge of it is kind of far more interesting to me than the just straight up romance, which is lovely. Don't get me wrong, it's really nice, and it's nice to do that sometimes. But for my head, I need something to kind of make it spicy, not just sexually spicy, which is always a good thing, but you know, add a bit of a twist and turn here and there.
Super, excellent. And Claire, tell us about what you write and why you write what you do.
I think I'm quite similar to Emma, actually, that I love the romance and love stories, but I really like having a rich background to it, which might be a setting or a plot and surprise, particularly secondary characters. I like to expand the cast, I suppose, of the story well beyond just the two heroines when I write, in my case. Yeah, I mean, I love, well, actually, I like the emotional roller coaster. I like the emotionally gripping stories, particularly, and that's why I head towards romance quite a lot, because you're always guaranteed a really emotionally gripping story with that. So I haven't gone that far, even though my stories are embedded in something usually broader. There's always that love story as well.
Super. And Bray, tell us about what you write.
I write fantasy and sci-fi and dystopian novels. So I write things that don't exist, but I tend to write them based on kind of social things that happen in our world. So the dystopian one was very much based on climate change. The trilogy is very much based in the question of religion versus philosophy. The one I'll be reading from today is about destiny and how much say you have in what you do. So I like to play with kind of big issues, but against the backdrop of kind of unbelievable things.
Very nice. And for you, Jen, what do you write and why?
I write contemporary romance, and it's usually, no, always at the moment, actually, slow burn. So that long, kind of drawn out journey for two people who probably maybe wouldn't be together otherwise, and yeah, it takes a long time, but they do get together in the end. That's what I write, I guess.
Excellent. Good question. Okay, so my next question is, all of you are on this panel because you play with the expectations of genre and to a lesser extent romance. So let's talk about the impact on your creativity of sticking rigidly to the rules, and do you do that, or knowing the rules, do you bend them slightly? And we'll start with Bray Willows, please.
I think the boundaries that are present in genre can be a lot of fun. I think they give you scope, and I think you can play with them. And sitting within those boundaries means that you're giving the reader what they want. And when you fail to kind of deliver on something because you decided not to play with those boundaries, I think the reader can feel cheated. So I like the boundaries, I like the parameters established in genre, but I also like how fluid they can be and how much fun you can have playing with them.
Excellent, good answer. And Claire, how does it affect your creativity, sticking to the rules or not?
Yeah, my first couple of books, I think I was a bit naive about not just romance in the sort of LesFic genre, but the expectation that most books sold as, you know, women loving women would be a romance. And I'm not sure if I realised that. So one of my earlier books was quite a dark romance. It featured a prostitute who fell in love with an older woman, and apparently 25 years is a lot too old for age gap, so that didn't fit too well. There was another pair who fell in love and turned out to be sisters, and again, this is not your typical romance, and it really just doesn't go down well at all, apparently. So I managed to really fuck up quite badly. So I kind of thought, okay, that's my reputation kind of just a bit shattered. So I'm not going to mind too much about the rules anymore. And actually, since then, I've written books which I think are kind of very typical romances, but the people come into them with a bit of trepidation. So it's I haven't worried about reader expectations after quite a disastrous start.
If they're going to stick with you, they're going to stick with you, whatever. I think is the case. So Jen, for you, how do the rules around genre affect what you write and how you do it and how you're creative about that?
I think with the characters that I write about, so my first two books, we've got two women in their 50s, which isn't seen that often in LesFic. One of them's also got a disability. She's got an injury from being in the army. So that's something that you don't often get. My second book, I'd never ever read or heard of any book that had a character with dyslexia in it. And I know quite a few people that have dyslexia, and how that affects their life really interested me. So I thought I'd write about that. Again, I've got two characters in their 40s, so not within the kind of the youngster sort of bracket. And my third book, I've gone for a difference in race and cultural background. So I've got a lady from Zimbabwe in there, and a British woman from a little seaside town. So there's a big difference between them. But my vision, my passion is writing about people that you don't hear about a lot. So yeah, people with disabilities, people with mental health issues, alcohol problems, and people who find themselves in or choose different paths for their lives. So my fourth book, which I'm currently editing, has a woman who has got pregnant by herself after various failed relationships. So she's becoming a single mum through choice, which I have a friend who's done that. So that's quite an interesting story to tell. Again, I haven't read, I don't think, anything like that before, so that's what I like.
Okay, and Emma, for you, playing with expectations and genre, how does that affect you when you're in your creative process? Can
I first say to Claire, thank you for fucking up, because actually those are two of the best reads I've read. I really enjoyed both of them very much, and they inspired me to write. So I fucked up big time with my first book, not because probably because I didn't learn from Claire's. I didn't know what I didn't know what I was looking at or what I was reading. But one of the comments I had for Finding You, which was my debut book, and it was only 2 years ago, so it's coming up 3 years ago now, was this book was fantastic until the last 5 pages. And it was because I'd ended it slightly differently, on a cliffhanger and positively, but people expect the end to happen at the end in this genre rather than actually maybe carried forward. And I think the interesting thing was the reason that this person 1-starred me for exactly that and nothing else was the comment was, I'm not going to buy the second book. And it's like, well, okay, hang on, I priced it at $1.99. It really doesn't get much more simple. I hadn't done it commercially.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big problem there insofar as if you, it wasn't my intention. It was a creative outlet for me, and I didn't want, the story wouldn't have felt right if I had ended it with, a boom right at the end. It would have just felt completely wrong. So that makes it really difficult. If you want to end a book in a slightly different way, I think it makes it more challenging if you feel you have to end it. And I know I'm sick of the kind of TV programs where they're always killing the lesbians, and it's not that kind of thing. It's kind of like a reality for me. It just comes from me. So if I if I can't do that, I've got to fit it into a profile. It just doesn't work. And yes, I may lose readers on that basis, and obviously that one person, that's great, because if you're going to one-star me, you know, that's fine. For something like that, I mean, I could be one-star for something else, that's fine. But you know, I think there has to be a level of understanding from the audience of, you know, and I think you get that when you have an audience. So I didn't have an audience. That was a first book, and I got very lucky. But if you have an audience, they will come with you, as you said, and that's why they follow the authors that they follow rigidly. But it does make it harder to expand, and you do get a level of uncertainty of like, okay, what's she going to throw at me this time? And some readers really like that, and that's great for me, because that's what they're going to get.
You get to play.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so we often hear talk about own voice work. How do you accommodate that when you're writing outside of your own lived experience? So Jen, I'll start with you, because you mentioned writing about 50-year-olds, because obviously you're nowhere near that age, and you know, having injuries from war, etc. You know, how do you work with that?
Well, first of all, I think I have a really mad imagination. I find it quite easy to imagine myself in somebody else's shoes. Obviously that's quite a good thing to have when writing fiction about people that you aren't, but also I've met so many people in my life. I've worked for the NHS for nearly 13 years now, and the patients and staff and everybody that I've met, just such a diverse bunch. For example, my fourth book has a lady from Zimbabwe, as I said before. One of my best friends is, funnily enough, in her 50s, although the Zimbabwean woman that I write about isn't. Anyway, she's from Zimbabwe, and we spend a lot of night shifts chatting about Zimbabwe and how it's different from here and what the similarities are, and how she kind of has experienced sort of the gay community over there, which she hasn't. I mean, she kind of didn't get that there was one, really. She's a straight married woman, and it was just, she was really surprised when I said, well, there probably is, and she was like, really, you know. So yeah, it's just talking to people, and then if I don't know personally anybody, I tend to put it out on Twitter and just say, look, I want to write about somebody with this personality trait or this disability or this background. Is there anybody that I can talk to? So I do so much research beforehand, and yeah, talk to as many people as I can, and then put thoughts together about it.
Super. And Claire, how do you sort of do your research around other experiences that you're not familiar with?
I must say I probably haven't strayed that far from my own experiences or people, or from those of people I know very well. I should probably say that I haven't been a prostitute, but I got lucky with that one. Apparently, I had some feedback that said, actually,
I thought there was some digging to be done into your background there, into your history.
But apparently, you know, that struck a chord with someone who had been a prostitute, so I got lucky with that one. But yeah, I think it is like Jen says. I think you need to be comfortable, very comfortable, or very familiar if you're to do a good job. I think when you're going beyond your experience, I'm more careful now. I think I did try to write a story from a point of view of somebody who was partially sighted, for example, but I thought I'd done the research. I thought I was fairly sensitive about it, but I did have some misgivings, so I had a sensitivity reader look at it, and actually there were massive problems with it, some which I'd thought might be an issue, others which I haven't seen at all. So I'm probably more cautious these days, actually, but it doesn't mean I'm going to stop trying to research characters who aren't my own, because I think you do need to represent more than just you sometimes.
Absolutely. So, Bray, along those lines, in terms of choosing people outside of your own lived experience, how do you go about deciding that they're going to be part of that story, or is it just a character that pops into your head that happens to be outside your lived experience?
I'm really lucky that I get to make shit up. So, like, I can have people who have wings and fangs and are purple. So, in that sense, I can just kind of decide who they are. I suppose they come to me quite naturally. For instance, in the second book of the trilogy, Kara is a super amazing businesswoman who is also Mexican and Haitian. And the Mexican part, obviously, I am Mexican. I look it, I know. But the Haitian part took a lot of research. But that's who she was, and that's how she came to me. And I think I wanted to show a person of color in a position of absolute power as well. But of course, through the rest of the trilogy, I'm researching gods from all different cultures, but that's just fun because some of them are elephants and some of them are, all kinds of stuff. So, I get to have a lot of fun with my character building. As yet, I haven't taken the road that Jen has, which I think is really amazing. And I haven't done much with disability or anything, but I think it'll happen at some point.
And Emma, writing outside your own lived experience, do you find that scary in terms of having sensitivity readers, making sure that what you're writing isn't going to be just, completely stereotypical?
No, I think for me, there are two sides to it. So if it's something that is a universal experience, and an element of anybody's experience is a universal experience. So when you're talking about emotions, we all know what sadness feels like. So then it becomes okay to write in that sense. And then you go to the next level, or I go to the next level of thinking, which is actually everybody's experience of that thing, whether it's a prostitute, whether it's disability or anything. Every person who has a disability has a different experience of it. So there will be some absolute things that are relevant to a specific experience for partially sighted, for example, and the research that needs to be done around that still needs to be done. Otherwise, we're being disrespectful, I think, in my mind, to that particular group or any group, or any scenario. And I think it's the same as researching a location, or if your setting is important to the story, then the setting needs to be right. So it is all worthy of the research that needs to be done. And then, yeah, there are universal experiences that we can draw on, and that's maybe part of the creativity that Jen talked about as well, is that you can think you've experienced it. It's never going to be the same as somebody who's experienced it directly, but none of our experiences are, even though we might think they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to go to the audience questions. And this one is for everybody. And we'll start with which shall we start with? We'll start with Bray this time, I think. No, we started with you already. We'll start with Claire. So what rules in LesFic romance do you enjoy breaking, Claire?
As many as possible, I think. As soon as I see somebody saying, I hate it when, that is just like a red flag. And I immediately think, it was on one of the groups, there was a list of tropes and qualities, which of these do you just never read and that you're a picky reader? And I just thought, I want to write a story which has all of those in now. And I immediately started thinking, so I'm just a bit bloody minded. So I'm best to keep away from kind of people's lesbic rules because it will just annoy me and I'll want to write a story to break them.
What about for yourself, Emma?
Honestly, I don't think I know the rules well enough to know whether I'm breaking them or not, and you're probably the best judge of that, actually. No, I don't even know. I think I get the general gist of girl meets girl, da 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 da. Those three little steps in the genre, and that's all I need. And even then, I want to break the end one totally every time I write. But outside of that, in terms of inside the content, as Claire said, I honestly don't know. I'm sorry, I'm an immature writer in that sense. I don't even know whether I'm breaking rules or not. And frankly, nobody's complained about that yet, you know, in terms of the stories. As long as they enjoy the story and it works, that kind of, I think I must be hitting something. It's probably because I've studied psychology that I can kind of know a little bit how things work, but I don't have the language of authors in that sense.
Sure. So, Bray, I'm going to put you on the spot because obviously you've been an editor for quite some time. So, how do you play with the rules?
I follow them. I can't help it. I think that's it. Like I like the boundaries of genre, and I like the boundaries of editing, and the way that works. You know, stories work because there are rules. There are rules. So yeah, I have to say I don't think I break any. I mean, I get to break stuff just by virtue of writing in the genres I write in. But the romance things and all that stuff, I'm good with it. So that's really bad, isn't it? I am an absolute rule follower.
Jen's shaking her head. So Jen, do you agree? Are you a follower of the rules, or do you bend them a little bit?
Yeah, I literally only really bend them with the characters that I write. So yeah, I basically send ideas to my publisher and they go, oh no, you can't write that. And I'm like, okay then. I'm quite happy to to write what I'm allowed to write, and break the little tiny pieces of rules that I can with my characters. Like, yeah, that works for me. And I quite enjoy writing things that a wide selection of people are going to enjoy, rather than kind of being brave and being a bit more niche with it.
Fair enough. Okay, so another question, we'll start with you, Emma. So writers tend to circle themes, either whether they know it or not. So do you think there are any themes that you seem to revisit constantly in your work?
Yeah, I think things like the relationship between love and loss comes through very strongly, and forbidden love, which is probably the nature of the genre to some extent. I think also with the reality and working with real and mature kind of relationships, more so than the fairy tale romance, as I would class it. That comes through quite strongly, and with atmosphere, twists and turns, suspense, humour. I think psychology drives my work a lot, in terms of writing more from an emotional perspective than necessarily plot kind of driven stuff. So very character based in that sense.
Yeah, okay. And Jen, have you identified any themes that you tend to circle around and find in every one of your books?
I think mine are kind of box standard slow burn romances. They drink a lot of coffee and eat a lot of cake, I have to say. I don't know whether it's just because it's British, sort of British romances. They drink tea and coffee and cake and hot chocolate and cook for each other and don't tend to get drunk very often and things like that, maybe. I have, apart from, no, I've got animals in each one of my books. So I've got a cat in the first one, dog and a cat in the second one. In my third book, I've got 2 rats called Nikki and Helen, for obvious reasons, if anybody remembers the show Bad Girls. And kind of humorous pets tend to run quite well. I think, yeah, putting a cat in a situation where there's lots of yarn is always going to be quite funny. So that was that was the start of it all. But yeah, pets and tea and coffee and cake, I think.
Okay. And Bray, for you, what themes do you find yourself constantly visiting and circling?
Coffee, definitely coffee.
Themes.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I like to play with big social issues. I think the one I probably keep coming back to is social disparity and snobbery. Snobbery pisses me off a lot. So I think I like to delve into those kinds of things. Like, who are you to tell me what to do, and how much say you get in your own destiny and what you want to do with your life.
And Claire, how about yourself? Are there any themes that you constantly revisit in your work?
I think, I mean, it sounds very heavy, but prejudice comes up all the time. It's probably the nature of the our subgenre. But I mean, it's always a source of antagonism, so that's really useful for a book. So I suppose that's why I come back to it. But I mean, even my sunniest romance, Poppy Jenkins, which is meant to be sort of about a big-hearted, optimistic woman who's all sunshine and flowers, and that story is driven by homophobia, biphobic assumptions, urban versus country folk attitudes, English versus Welsh antagonism. It is all driven by all these prejudices, even in this very sunny romance.
Nice.
And Emma, themes for you, or have I already covered you? Yeah, excellent. Okay, we'll go for audience question then. So this question's from Rowan Miltenberg, and they say, how do you design the covers of your books, and how important do you think the book cover is? And they loved Finding Faith by you, Emma. So we'll start with you. How do you go about designing your book covers, and how important are they?
They're very important. If people don't like the cover, they're not even going to read the back cover copy, I think, for the most part. And that, so, you know, and if you're in a chart, you need to attract the eye. So they're very important. My wife does them. She's very talented. And so, yeah, that's great. I'm lucky.
Claire?
I was going to say, I love Emma's covers, actually. They're really classy, and say it's a romance and story, but still catch your eye. That's a really quite hard balance to keep. My wife does mine as well, so I'm quite lucky that I've got somebody who's going to be patient with me, because I always give her a rough idea, and then she'll come up with something that everybody likes apart from me, and I want something else. So yeah, I'm quite lucky to have somebody patient. But yeah, the cover is very important. I mean, it's got to catch your eye, it's got to tell you a bit of the story. They're tough to get right in all those different ways.
And Bray and Jen, you're both traditionally published, so how much say do you get in your covers? And Jen, let's start with you.
Yeah, I get kind of final say type stuff. So I fill in a form basically when it's time, and that gets sent to the designers, and they produce something. And the form kind of, you put in things like, what do your characters look like? Is there anything you want to see in there? Is there anything you don't want to see in there? And just things like that. And I think looking at like my free covers that I've had done so far, I think they tend to be similar is the wrong word, but like you can identify that they're all by the same person. So they're all photograph type covers, and they're all really colourful. And yeah, so I think it's, I guess it depends what kind of thing you want to portray, doesn't it? I mean, if you want to be an author that's kind of diverse and does loads of different genres and writes lots of different things, then it's not so important that your covers all look the same, or at least similar, or that identifiable as you. But I guess with me, because I write such a sort of similar thing every time I release a book, that's quite good for me.
And Bray?
Yeah, I'm similar. We fill out a form. I'm with Bold Strokes, and it's a very collaborative process on our form. It's like Jen was saying, it's, you know, what do you like? What would you like to see? So I get to play with the ideas before I even send the form in to the publisher and say, I don't like people on my covers. I have a real bias against people, and that could be because I don't like them in general, but it could also be because I want the reader to come up with their own version of the character in their own head. So you'll almost never find a person on my covers. It's usually some kind of imagery, but it's really cool because I get to put the types of imagery I would like, and then that goes off to one of our designers, and then I get a couple to choose from. And it's really cool because I can go back and say, you know, I'm not crazy about that, but what about this and changing that, and they do it. So yeah, it's very cool.
Excellent. Okay. So what are your thoughts on ensuring representation for a wider group of people stroke life experience? So we've touched on this a little bit, but kind of how is this problematic in terms of firstly sales and secondly politically? So I think we'll start with you, Emma, on that one.
I'm very much up for it. I've got a number of books on the back burner that feature in that way. Sales can be an issue, and especially if you're a new author, potentially. If you've got a following, I think they will read anything once. Never read after that, but you've got a chance of reading something. You know, the people know what they're going to get in that sense, and they like you for that reason. I think it would be great if we could do more on that front personally, and have people be open to it. But unfortunately, it's the reality. People like what they like, and if they don't like it, why should they buy it? And I think, you know, that's the bottom line. It's a commercial business. If we were all writers who didn't need to sell books in order to write, we would write probably an awful lot of different stuff in many respects. Whereas if you have to sell to make a living, to earn a living, to feed your children, then you have to some extent strike that balance. That's a rule probably I won't break that easily. But yeah, it's tough.
And Bray, what about for you? How do you kind of try to ensure representation for
I make up people on other planets. That's what I do.
You've done that one time out of 6 books. Come on.
But I mean, my other character, I mean, the trilogy is the Greek Furies. You know, they have wings and eat people's heads. Representation.
You're being very difficult. Because your other character in all of those books is a human character.
It is. And that character, you know, the primary one in that is very awkward and very socially me. So I don't know. I think representation is an important thing. I think it has to be very carefully done. I think you have to know what the hell you're doing. And I think you have to have sensitivity readers, and you have to be very aware of stepping outside of that and making sure that it's true to the character, and not just because you're trying to fit in representation. It can't be shoehorned in. It needs to be authentic.
Okay. And Jen, you mentioned earlier that you'll put something into your publisher and they'll say, no, you can't write that. Can you, what kind of things have you wanted to write about that you've felt you've not been able to for whatever reason? Because as Emma said, it's a commercial business. People, your publishers, you as potentially a self-publisher needs to sell books. So what kind of topics are there floating around in your head that you'd love to write about, but
So I have a first draft, which I talked a lot about on social media and got a lot of good kind of positive response about. But unfortunately, it deals with things like attempted suicide and assault and stuff like that. It's set on a mental health ward. Now, I've worked on a mental health ward for a long, long time. So that bit wasn't so much of an issue. It is just about selling books. If you work with a traditional publisher, they're not going to publish something that isn't going to sell unless there's a really good reason behind it. So it is really difficult being with a publisher, although it's amazing because they know what they're doing and I don't feel like I do. But the caveat to that is that you have to get them to agree to publish stuff. So I keep sending them ideas and what do you think about this, and sometimes I'll get a yes please write that, and I'm like okay, I'm allowed. But things like, so recently I my last proposal that I sent in for my 5th book is about a woman in her 30s and a woman in her 50s. And the 50s thing, they like that because, again, it's not written about much, and I did it with my first book, but I also added in a kind of breast cancer survivor type thing, but that could be a trigger to a lot of readers, so that's not the kind of thing that will sell very well, so that's not something that I'm going to include in that book. But things like, so my 30-year-old character has a little girl with cerebral palsy. So that kind of thing is good. I've nursed people with cerebral palsy, and you know, that's something that I want to represent well. I've already talked to a lady whose husband has the condition and had a lot of information off her, so that's quite good. But yeah, it is just about selling books at the end of the day. You know, how you do that is kind of, that's the thing that you have to decide. You know, so
yeah, excellent. And Claire, what about you in terms of representing wider groups of people? How do you kind of balance that?
I mean, it's something that I'm in lots of minds about, because I'm very aware that we are an underrepresented group, and I don't like that. And then I shouldn't expect to ignore other underrepresented groups within that as well. So it is something I'm very aware of, but also you don't want to do representation for representation's sake, as Bray says. You don't want to make an absolute meal of it, and also perpetuate stereotypes that are very harmful. But at the same time, I mean, I'd love to see publishers. I mean, the big issue is it's very white-centric, our genre, and lots are. And when we can see vividly the consequences of having that white-centric view of the world. And actually, I would, Emma's right, it is a business, but I would love to see readers actually expand it, because they can see how important it is. Expand their idea of who a heroine or love interest is. I'd love to see publishers publishing much broader range of authors of colour, because it's like with drawing a parallel with sort of like gay books a few years ago. There'd be like the one gay book and you were meant to read it, but maybe you didn't fancy the storyline, so you didn't want to pick it up. But that, you know, if you get lots of gay books out there of all different stories, then everybody starts reading them, and it expands everybody's view of the world. And that's what I'd like to see in a lot of areas. So I think it has to come from lots of different directions. I mean, from my point of view, I think I need to work harder to represent actually my world, because it's not as white as I've made it out in my books. Right. You know, not my extended family isn't all white, neither are my friends, and certainly my kids' friends aren't. I mean, they go to a school where it's a third probably kids of colour. So I mean, that's my world. It's not all white, and I should be doing better to represent that and understand it, I think. But at the same time, being very aware of Bray's points that you don't appropriate them and really fuck up somebody else's story.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got we're running out of time. So I've got a question here. Where was it? Oh, it's gone. Here we go. So it's for everybody, but it was directed to you, Bray, but I think it would be good for everybody to answer. So if someone has not read any of your work before, what would you recommend somebody starts with? So Bray, let's start with you.
I think that's a difficult question, really, isn't it? It's because it's like trying to say you'll like this one of these of my children the best, because you're not supposed to have favorite kids, are you? And I think as an author, you might have a book that you think is really good that maybe hasn't gotten the kind of attention from readers. So I don't know. I mean, I have a sci-fi that's on a completely different planet, but my trilogy is kind of based here, as is my fairy tale, Spinning Tales, which is based here. Chosen is climate change dystopian, so they're all kind of very different genres. So I suppose it depends on what genre you like.
So you're not going to answer the question for the audience?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Chosen is my favorite child. If
Okay,
I have to be honest, Chosen is my favorite child.
Excellent. All right. Claire, what book would you recommend a reader new to your work would start with?
I think I've probably got the same issue as the other authors here, that because we write quite different books, it's quite hard to target one, isn't it? The one, my most popular one, I suppose, is Poppy Jenkins, which is the most traditional romance of them. It is the sunny romance. The one that's more challenging is After Mrs. Hamilton. If you want to, you know, be appalled and leave a bad review, go for that one. And then probably the one I'm most proud of actually is The Goodmans, which I think has the broadest range of characters and subplots all intertwined. There's some politics that readers can get annoyed about within there as well. So that's the one I'm proudest of, I think.
Okay. Emma, have you got the same problem? So many different genres you're playing with?
It's impossible. And for me, it's because it's a learning journey as well. So if you want to start at the beginning of my journey, then start with the first book, which is Finding You. If you don't like a cliffhanger ending, then don't start with that book. You know, This Is Me, which is the novella, was a real sidestep into something more literary, and I love it for that, from that perspective. But it hasn't, as Ray said, you know, some books don't get as well read. That is a piece of work that I never even dreamed of writing. Cosa Nostra, that you know is out now, is probably one of the best pieces. Madeline as well is a lovely book set in post-World War II. And then Forbidden is one of my favorites, which is set in pre-war Syria. So again, you know, it's a forbidden love story set in an environment where love really is forbidden between women, with an oil rigger. But as soon as you say oil rigger, it's really not very sexy. So, you know,
I think it's very sexy.
But that, you know, and if you like rom-com, then there's the Duckton by Dale series, which sits somewhere bit sort of sideways from where Claire lives, I think. So, you know, it's set in the UK, up northish, sideways. So yeah, it's so difficult because I've been exploring my writing to find out where I kind of work, and not found it yet necessarily, but it's a journey. So if you want to follow the journey, start at the beginning. But if you like something in between, just pick something up and, you know, go with it, really.
Okay, Jen, you're my last hope. Do you have one book that you can just say, you should start with this one?
Hooked on You.
Pardon?
I only have two
Hooked
books
on
out.
You.
The second book hasn't done as well in the kind of critical minds of people, I think. Hooked on You is my baby. It was the book that I got a contract with my publisher with. It was the book that the publisher kind of, she was like, yay, you're writing about two women in their 50s, and got very excited about it. And it was the one that I just sent because I thought maybe it might be okay. I'd never ever sent a book to a publisher before, and within 3 days I got an email back saying, yes, please, we want you. And so that, yeah, and it's very sweet. There's not a lot of drama in it. It's a coming out story for one of the characters, for Anna. There's some interesting kids in there, like grown-up kids. Anna and Ollie both have 2 kids each, and yeah, it's real, and it's about crochet, which, as you guys who have all met me all know, I'm a little obsessed with. I don't know if you can see behind, there's crochet toys over one of my shoulders, but yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to just finish on a little bit of fun. So it's going to be an either or question, and then I will say your name and then you answer first thing that comes to your head. So short story or full length novel? Emma?
Full length novel.
Claire?
Novel.
Ray?
Short story.
Jen?
Novel.
Okay, high school sweetheart or late blooming love? Jen?
Late blooming love.
Ray?
Late blooming love.
Claire?
Late blooming love.
Emma?
Yes, the last one. Late love.
Okay, one last one. Hero or anti-hero? Claire.
Oh, anti-hero.
Bray.
Anti-hero.
Jen.
I have no idea. Probably anti-hero as well.
Yeah, anti-hero.
Anti-hero. A lot of consensus with this panel. It's good. Everybody's on the same page. So that's all we've got time for. Unfortunately, the authors did prepare, or fortunately, in a way, the authors prepared lovely readings for you all. But we've just been so enthralled in our chatting that we didn't have a chance to do that. So there is the after party breakout, 8 until 10. So should the authors wish to do that, if there's the demand for it, we can set up some breakout rooms for the authors to do those readings with anybody, with the audience. So thank you very much, lovely authors, for participating on this lovely sunny afternoon. Thank you, wonderful attendees, for coming and listening and asking questions. That was fabulous. Some of the questions, well, quite a few of the questions we weren't able to ask. So I'm going to send those to the authors afterwards, compile a little document, and then pop that up on Facebook's Queer the Shelves page on Facebook. Next up, in just about 9 minutes, is our final panel of the day. That's a little something literary. That's got Elise Goldon, Simon Smalley, Megan Taylor, and Julie Cohen. So that's going to be a great panel. When this ends, a survey should pop up on your Internet Explorer or Safari or Google if you've got that up. So if you could spare a couple of minutes just to give me some feedback, that would be very much appreciated. And once again, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.